The last of the winter chill clung to the air, sharp as a needle. When the train groaned into Ash Mesa, it was 1889, and the land across the Arizona and New Mexico territories felt brittle, waiting for a breath it could not find. The town itself was little more than a smudge of wood and dust against the enormous, silent wall of the Chusca Mountains. Wind was the real mayor here. It slicked the sand against the windows of the passenger car and carried the sting of coal smoke and something older, something like dried bones, coyote wash, which was supposed to be the lifeblood of the place, was just a pale, cracked scar in the earth, empty of everything but shadow. Ellen Ward stepped down onto the platform, her hand tight on the single carpetbag she owned. The movement was stiff, guarded. She was a young woman, maybe 22 or 24 years of age, but she moved like someone who had been old for a long time. Her dress was good wool, once, but the trail had worked its grit deep into the fibers. A dark scarf was wrapped high on her neck, tucked secure, though the day was not cold enough to need it. She kept her chin down, not from shyness, but from a calculated need to be unseen. Her eyes, the color of a rainy sky, scanned the small cluster of buildings. She was looking for safety. She was looking for a place to stop being a name on someone else's ledger. The station master, a man named Ward Dell with a face like cured leather, watched her. He spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed dangerously close to the hem of her skirt. He had seen her kind before, or thought he had. Women alone were either trouble or bait. "No rooms at the hotel, miss," he said, before she had even asked. His voice was a rasp. "Full up." Ellen looked at the hotel. It was a 2-story box of raw lumber, and only 2 windows showed a light. Her gaze did not waver. "I see. Is there a boarding house?" "Nothing for you," he said. He turned his attention back to a crate, his dismissal as sharp as a slammed door. Ellen's shoulders tightened for a brief second, a small tremor under the dusty wool. She had expected no welcome. She had only hoped for indifference. She turned away from the station, her boots kicking up small puffs of alkali dust. The main street of Ash Mesa was wide enough for 3 wagons abreast and mostly empty. A saloon, May Larkin's place, spilled a weak yellow light and the sour smell of stale beer onto the boardwalk. Further down, a new pine sign hung over an office Sheriff Judson Hale. The star on it was still shiny. Across the street, a small woman with skin the color of the red earth, her black hair bound in a traditional wrap, paused in the doorway of her shop. Atsidi Yazi, the seamstress, watched Ellen walk. She saw the scarf. She saw the way the young woman's hand protectively crossed her stomach. She saw the old story of a bruise, and the older story of flight. Atsidi Yazi turned back inside to her needles. From the high desert, the town was just a collection of small noises. Nesbegay heard the train whistle long before he saw it smoke. He sat with his back against a juniper, still as the red rock around him. He was a dine, a man of the people, and he had once been a scout for the trading caravans that crossed this land. He had guided them, read the signs, kept them safe, but he had not been able to keep his own brother safe. The 2 small wooden markers on the ridge to the east, they were his memory. They were the line he did not cross back over. Now he scouted only for himself. He watched the lines men drew on maps, and the lines they drew with their laws and their guns. He watched the town of Ash Mesa, a place that wanted to own the land but did not know how to listen to it. His goal was simple: to keep his own freedom, to not be caught in the white man's net of paper and obligation. He had seen the new woman get off the train. He had seen her walk, the way a fox moves when it knows the hounds are out. He felt no urge to help. Help was a rope. He would just watch. He would keep his boundaries. Down in the town, Sheriff Judson Hale leaned back in his chair, his new boots on his new desk. The brass star felt heavy on his chest, heavier than he had expected. It was not just the weight of the metal. It was the weight of Santa Fe. A telegram had come through an hour before the train. It was sitting on his desk now, the flimsy paper smelling of electricity and importance. It was from Judge Easton Beaumont, a man whose name was spoken in whispers all the way from here to the capital. The telegram was precise. A girl, young, dark hair, last seen heading west. The word abducted was there, but another word, property, was implied in the sharp, commanding tone. Judge Beaumont considered this girl, this Ellen Ward, to be his or his son's, which was the same thing. Hale was new to this badge. He had plans. He wanted to be a man of respect, a man who brought order. But the telegram came with a promise of a reward, a very large one, and an unspoken threat. Judge Beaumont did not like to lose things. Haley folded the paper. He did not know about the girl who had just arrived. He did not know her name was Ellen Ward. He just knew that his new job had suddenly become very complicated. He was a man caught between the paper law he was sworn to uphold and the older, richer law of favors and money. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, Ellen found herself at the edge of the town. Every door had been closed to her. The boarding house was full. The dry goods store had no work. Reverend Hollis, a thin man with worried eyes, had offered her a prayer but not a place to sleep. He had muttered something about the town's reputation and the dangers for a woman alone. She was alone. The realization settled not with panic, but with a cold, clear certainty. She had run from one cage only to find herself in a wider, windier one. She smelled wood smoke. Not the coal smoke of the train, but the clean, sharp scent of juniper. It came from a small hogan set far back from the road, and from a wagon nearby where a man was unhitching his mules. This was Diego Salazar, a trader who moved between the mesas and the town, respecting neither and respected by both. He saw Ellen standing there, a silhouette against the fading light. He nodded, a simple gesture of acknowledgement. "Senora," he said. His voice was quiet. "I am looking for a place to stay," Ellen said. Her own voice sounded thin in the open air. Diego Salazar considered her. He looked back toward the town, toward the new sheriff's office. He knew about the telegram. News moved faster than horses in this land, carried by whispers and intuition. He knew what Judge Beaumont was. "The town is not friendly to strangers tonight," he said. He gestured with his chin toward the saloon. "May Larkin. She runs the saloon. She might know something. She knows everything." Inside the saloon, May Larkin was wiping down the heavy oak bar. She was a big woman, in body and in presence, with red hair piled high and a gaze that missed nothing. She had built this place with her own 2 hands, and she ran it with an iron will. She saw Ellen hesitate at the door, a small, dark shape against the twilight. "Come in or stay out, child," May called, her voice booming over the noise of 2 cattle hands playing cards. "The wind is not paying for drinks." Ellen pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the smell of whiskey. It was the last place on earth she wanted to be, but she was out of options. She walked to the bar. "Mr. Salazar said you might know of a room." May stopped wiping. She looked Ellen up and down, taking in the dusty dress, the fine, trembling hands, and the scarf, especially the scarf. "Diego says a lot of things," May said, her voice dropping lower. "And I know what I see. You are not the kind of woman who should be in Ash Mesa right now. Or maybe," she added, her eyes narrowing, "you are exactly the kind." She poured a small glass of water from a pitcher and pushed it across the bar. "Wardell turned you away. Hollis prayed for you. And the new sheriff is reading a very important piece of paper from Santa Fe. This whole town is a dry creek bed. Girl, waiting for one drop of rain to cause a flash flood." Ellen's hand closed around the glass. The water was cool. She drank it slowly. She was not a piece of property. She was not a lost child. She was Ellen Ward, and she was here. The silver mine on the hill was dead, its shafts dark and empty, but she was not. I am not looking for trouble, Ellen said, her voice finding a sudden, unexpected strength. I am just looking for a place to be safe. May Larkin looked at her for a long time. The noise of the saloon seemed to fade away. She saw the girl, but she also saw the lines being drawn across the map of this territory. Lines of railroad steel, telegraph wire, and a rich man's power. Safe, May said, letting out a short, harsh laugh. Safe is not a word we use much here. Child, we use words like survived. She jerked her head toward the back door. There is a shed out back. It is not much, but the door has a good lock. It will cost you $1 for the night. Ellen nodded, pulling a small coin purse from her bag. It was almost all she had. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling down from the chuskas. Nesbege stood on the ridge, watching the last light leave the sky. He saw the light in May's shed blink on, a tiny spark of yellow in the vast, gathering dark. He wrapped his blanket tighter. He knew what that girl was running from. He had seen the look in her eyes from 100 yards away. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. It was the look of someone who knew that freedom was not something given. It was something you held on to, with your teeth and your fingernails, every single day. The smoke from his small, hidden fire rose straight up, a thin gray line, a memory ascending, before the wind took it and tore it to pieces. The dollar coin was heavy in her palm, a cold piece of metal that bought her a few hours of quiet. May Larkin had pointed to the back. The lock works, was all she said. Ellen nodded, pushed through the bat-wing doors, and stepped back into the night. The cold was immediate, sinking through her dress. The alley between the saloon and the blacksmith's forge was a canyon of shadow, reeking of stale beer, old iron, and something fouler. The shed, a low, dark shape, was at the far end of it. It was the only way. She took a step, her hand tight on her bag, and the shadows at the other end of the alley shifted. They resolved into two men, blocking the narrow passage. They had come from the saloon, she realized, but not through the front. They must have been waiting in the dark. Well, looky here, Cal, one of them slurred. He was a big man, smelling of cheap whiskey and unwashed wool. Found what we was looking for. The other man, Cal laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. She's the new one. The one Wardell said ain't got no papers. Ain't got no room. Ellen stopped. She did not breathe. This was it. This was the moment she had been running from. The moment that had haunted her sleep for 1,000 miles. It had a different face, a different voice, but the intent was the same. The air in her lungs turned to ice. She took one step back. Now, don't be like that. Missy, the big one said. Taking a lurching step toward her, he held up a hand. We just want to be friendly. Show you some real Ash Mesa hospitality. She looks cold, Cal said, his eyes glinting in the sliver of light from the saloon's back window. We ought to help her get warm. They were fanning out, a crude, drunken pincer move. Ellen's back touched the rough-sawn planks of the saloon wall. There was nowhere else to go. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She would not scream. She had screamed once before, and it had brought no one. She would not be property. She would not be passed from hand to hand. Her fingers fumbled inside her carpet bag, searching for the small, sharp sewing scissors. It was not much, but it was hers. Just be nice, the big man whispered. Closer now. She could smell the rot on his breath. And then he was not there. Or rather, a third shadow was. He had made no sound. Not a scuff of a boot, not a clearing of a throat. One moment, the alley held two threats. The next, it held a third. Silent fact. Nesbege stood at the mouth of the alley, where the weak lamplight met the deep, absolute dark. He was perfectly still. He was not in the light, and he was not in the shadow. He was on the line between them. He simply stood, his hands empty at his sides, his face unreadable. He looked at the two men. not at Ellen. The big cowboy froze, his hand still outstretched. He squinted. "The hell you want?" "Navajo." Nez said nothing. His silence was louder than a shout. It was a heavy thing, like a stone in the air. "This ain't none of your business," Cal spat. But his voice had lost its confident, ugly edge. It was thinner now. He took a half step back. The big man tried to recover his bluster. "Yeah, you get on. We're just talking to the lady." Nez took one slow step into the alley. The light caught the side of his face. His eyes were flat, deep, and ancient. He did not look angry. He did not look anything. He just looked. The big man's breath hitched. He knew the stories. Everyone in Ash Mesa knew the stories. They called him the one who doesn't step back. They said he had faced down 3 miners with a broken pick handle and had not so much as blinked. They said he was more shadow than man. "We was just leaving," Cal mumbled, pulling on the big man's sleeve. "I ain't scared of him," the big man said, but his feet were already shuffling backward. "Let's go. I said my thirst come back." They stumbled past each other, pushing to get out of the narrow space, falling out onto the main street. "Stupid girl, anyway," one of them shouted back, his voice shaky with whiskey and a sudden, sharp fear, probably full of disease. Then they were gone, their clumsy boot steps fading toward the saloon's front door. The alley was suddenly, profoundly quiet. There was only the sound of the wind, high and lonely, and Ellen's own ragged breathing. Her hand was still in her bag, her fingers locked around the cold metal of the scissors. She looked at the man. Nez Begay had not moved. He was still standing on that line between light and dark. He did not look at the shed. He did not look at the street. He looked at her. Ellen did not move. She did not say thank you. The words felt wrong, too small. Thank you was what a victim said to a rescuer. She did not feel rescued. She felt seen. His eyes held hers. There was no pity in them. There was no ownership. There was no invitation. What she saw there, in that deep, quiet gaze, was a shocking, painful recognition. It was the look of someone who also knew the shape of a cage. It was the look of someone who had also stood with his back to a wall, with no one coming. He was not her savior. He was a witness. He did not ask her name. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not offer her a room, or money, or protection. After a long, uncounted moment, he turned his head, just a fraction. He tilted his chin toward the end of the alley that led away from the town, away from the streetlights and the locked doors, toward the open, dark mesa that rose against the stars. It was not a command. It was not an offer. It was a third option, a path. Ellen looked at the shed. She saw the flimsy lock, saw herself cowering inside, listening to every footstep, a prisoner of May's $1 kindness. She looked back down the alley to the main street, where the drunken laughter was already starting up again, a town full of men who saw her as Missy or property. Then she looked at the path he had indicated. It was pure darkness. It was unknown. It was cold, but it was open. She let go of the scissors inside her bag. She pulled her hand out. Empty. She straightened her spine. Pulling her shoulders back, she had a new goal, born in that second, to sleep where no one's hands could find her, to not disappear into a shed, or a saloon, or a sheriff's ledger. Nez Begay did not wait for her. He did not hold out a hand. He simply turned and began to walk, his steps as silent as his arrival. He was not leading her. He was just leaving. He kept his own boundaries. He had shown her a way. Whether she took it was her own choice. Ellen waited until he was 10. Then, 20 paces ahead, she watched him, a shadow moving against shadows. He was not a rescuer. He was not a threat. He was a direction. She followed. From the saloon window, May Larkin watched the girl and the Navajo disappear into the dark. She shook her head, a grim set to her jaw. "Well, child," she muttered to the empty glass she was polishing, "you've gone and done it now." By morning, the story was all over Ash Mesa. It was on Wardell's lips as he sorted the mail. It was whispered over the counter at the dry goods store. That new girl, the one with no papers, the one the sheriff was asking about. She had left town with the Navajo. The words "girl without papers" and "Navajo warrior" were said with a sneer, a judgment, a dark and simmering excitement. The town's prejudice, always just below the surface, had found a focus. But Ellen did not know. She was walking, putting one foot in front of the other, her lungs aching from the cold. Thin air. He stayed far ahead, a steady, unhurried shape in the pre-dawn gloom. He was not holding her. He was not even with her. He had simply opened a door she had not known existed. And freedom, she was learning, did not start with a grand rescue. It started with a single, respected step. It started with the quiet, radical idea of being helped without being held. Dawn broke gray and cold, laying a hand of frost over Ash Mesa. The town woke slowly, but Sheriff Judson Hale had been awake for an hour, the telegraph key in the station office clicking like a death watch beetle. The first telegram had been a query. The one that came through at 6 in the morning was a command. It was from Santa Fe, from Judge Easton Beaumont's personal office. It was long. It had a name, Ellen Ward. It had a description that matched the woman from the train precisely, down to the dark wool dress and the small, worn carpet bag. And it had a story. Daughter of a prominent family, unwell, confused. She had been taken. The telegram said, the word was there. Underlined 3 times in the transcription Wardell handed him, abducted. Hale read the word, and his blood ran a little colder, then a little hotter. Abducted. That changed everything. That made it simple. It was not a runaway wife or a girl in trouble. It was a crime, a high-profile crime. She was here, Wardell said, his voice greasy with self-importance. Asking for a room. Looked lost. Who saw her last? Hale asked. His voice flat. He was already pinning his badge to a heavier coat. That's the thing, Sheriff. Wardell leaned in, lowering his voice. May Larkin over at the saloon. She saw her, but the boys, Cal and Smitty, they saw her leave. In the dark. He paused for effect. With him. Hale's hand stopped on his coat button. Him. Nesbigay. Wardell spat on the pot-bellied stove, where the juice sizzled and stank. The girl left with the Navajo. Walked right out into the dark with him. Abducted. Just like the paper says. Hale's jaw tightened. This was it. The judge's daughter, taken by an Indian. It was a clean narrative. It was a narrative that demanded action. It was a narrative that would make him a hero. He walked back to his office, the telegram clutched in his hand. Judge Beaumont was a man who owned railroads, mines, and politicians, and he wanted his property back. The telegram had ended with a promise, $500 for the safe return of the girl, and a personal guarantee of advancement for the man who brought her in. $500. It was more than Hale made in a year. Advancement. That meant a marshal's badge, a post in Santa Fe, a seat at the table with men like Beaumont. It meant he would never have to be the new, untested sheriff of a dust-blown town like Ash Mesa again. He slammed the door to his office. He would bring her back. He would bring her back by any means necessary. His first stop was May Larkin's. The saloon was empty save for May herself, stacking clean glasses. Mornin', Sheriff, she said, not looking up. You're out early for a man of the law. The girl, the one from the train yesterday. Wardell said she spoke to you. She did. May polished a glass until it squeaked. Bought a night in the shed. Never used it. Her dollar. She left, Hale said, with Nesbigay. May's hand stopped. She placed the glass down, very deliberately. She turned her pale, sharp eyes on him. Did she now? It was not a question. The girl is Ellen Ward, daughter of Judge Beaumont's business partner. She's been abducted, I'm forming a posse. May held his gaze. Abducted. That's a strong word. Sheriff, she looked to me like she was running. There's a difference. The law says there is not, Hale said, his voice hard. The telegram from the judge says abducted. That is all I need to know. You see him. You see her. You send word. He turned and left, his boots heavy on the boardwalk. He could feel May's eyes on his back. He did not care. The town was already stirring. The news was spreading. $500. It split the town down the middle. Men who had not held a steady job in months suddenly felt a deep, abiding concern for justice. Cal and Smitty, nursing hangovers at the blacksmiths, were the first to offer their services. They saw the money, a glittering pile of coins that would buy them whiskey and women for a year. Others, like the shopkeeper, saw a chance to get on the right side of the new sheriff, the one who was clearly backed by Santa Fe money. But there was an undercurrent of disquiet. Reverend Hollis wrung his hands in the small, unpainted church, praying for the girl's soul but fearing the posse's guns. Atsaidi Yazi, the dying seamstress, heard the news from a woman buying thread. She said nothing, but her needles moved faster. She knew Nesbigay, and she knew men like Hale. She knew this was not about justice. It was about a map, and a man drawing lines on it, claiming what was not his. The path Ellen followed was not a path at all. It was a memory of a path, a way of moving through the juniper and sandstone that left almost no trace. Nesbigay moved like smoke, and she, in her heavy wool and failing boots, felt like a dying fire behind him. She was exhausted. The night had scoured the last of her strength. Her feet were raw inside her shoes, and the cold had settled deep in her bones. He did not speak. He did not look back. He just moved, a steady, relentless presence 20 yards ahead. He was her only landmark in a world that had become alien and vast. The sun came up, revealing a landscape of breathtaking, terrible beauty. Red rock towers, carved by wind, stood against a pale blue sky. But there was no water. There was no shelter. There was only the man, and the impossible, silent walk. She stumbled, her ankle twisting on a loose rock. A sharp cry of pain was torn from her throat. She fell to her knees, the sharp gravel biting into her palms. She had nothing left. She had run 1,000 miles from a cage, only to die of exhaustion in a wilderness. He stopped. He did not turn, not at first. He stood for a full minute, listening. Not to her, she realized. To the world. He was listening for the sound of her fall, for the echo, for what it might betray. Then he turned. He walked back to her, his steps as measured and quiet as before. He stood over her, his shadow falling across her. Ellen flinched, pulling her hand back. She looked up at him, her breath coming in sobs. I cannot go on. He looked at her, his face the same unreadable mask as the night before. His eyes scanned her, her twisted ankle, her bleeding hands, the raw desperation on her face. He looked at her, but he saw the small, delicate animal caught in a trap, ready to chew its own leg off to be free. He said nothing. He reached down, not for her, but for her carpet bag, which had fallen beside her. He lifted it. It was light. Then he bent lower. He did not offer a hand to pull her up. Instead, he turned his back to her and knelt. It took her a moment to understand. It was the most impersonal offer of help she could imagine. He was offering himself as a horse would, as a thing to be used. "No," she whispered. He remained, kneeling, his back to her. He would not ask twice. He would not ask at all. Tears of shame and anger and a desperate, aching gratitude filled her eyes. She put her bleeding hands on his shoulders. She pulled herself up, her weight leaning on him. He rose in one smooth, powerful motion, lifting her easily. He adjusted her weight, her arm draped over his shoulder, her side pressed against his. He took most of her weight. but he made her walk. They moved slower, but they moved. They walked for another hour, or maybe it was a lifetime. The landscape changed. The wide-open mesa gave way to a narrow, rising valley, thick with juniper trees and piñón pine. The air smelled of resin and dust. And then they were there. It was not a hogan. It was a cabin, small and square, built with such care from the local red rock that it seemed to grow out of the hillside. It was tucked into a fold in the earth, invisible until you were 50 feet away. A small plume of smoke, so thin it was almost invisible, rose from a stone chimney. He had a fire banked. He had known he was coming back. He led her to the door, a solid thing made of thick, weathered planks. He let go of her, and she stumbled, leaning against the doorframe. He stepped back, his boundary instantly re-established. He pushed the door open. Inside, it was dark and warm. A single room, a small, deep fireplace of black stone, a cot against one wall, with a thick, neatly folded wool blanket, a sturdy table, 2 chairs, shelves carved into the stone, holding small pots of dried herbs, a bag of flour, a tin of coffee. It was clean. It was spare. It was a fortress of silence. He gestured, a simple, open-palmed motion, toward the inside. He did not step across the threshold. Ellen limped inside, her hand on the rough-hewn frame. She was safe, for now. She sank onto one of the chairs, her entire body shaking with a relief so profound it felt like pain. She looked at her bag, which he had placed on the floor just inside the door. He was still outside, a shadow in the doorway. He was watching the trail back, his head turned, listening. "You are," she began, her voice a raw croak. He turned his head. His eyes met hers. "I am Nez Bigay," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones rubbing together. It was the first time she had heard it. He stepped back, out of the doorway. He did not leave. He simply moved to the side of the cabin, his back to the stone wall, and sat. He was a sentinel. He was a wall. He was the line between her and the world that was coming for her. Ellen watched him go. She was alone, in a strange man's cabin, but she was not afraid, not of him. She bent, her hands trembling, and opened her carpet bag. She took out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a letter, half finished, the ink slightly smeared. "Dearest Anne," it read, I will not marry him. Archer is not a man. He is a hand at the throat. The writing stopped. She reached up and, with clumsy, shaking fingers, began to unwrap the scarf from her neck. The wool was rough against her skin. She pulled it free. In the dim light of the cabin, just above her collarbone, was a cluster of old, fading bruises. They were yellow and purple, in the distinct shape of fingers. A small, crescent-shaped cut, long since scabbed over, marred the skin, a mark left by a signet ring. She was not abducted. She was an escapee. In Ash Mesa, Sheriff Judson Hale unrolled a map of the territory. He pinned it to his wall. He knew where Nez Bigay lived. Everyone knew, more or less. He took a pencil and drew a hard, dark circle around the juniper valleys of the Chuska Range. "Find him," he said to his new deputies, Cal and Smitty. "Find him, and find the girl." The hunt was on. The silence of the cabin was a living thing. It was not an empty silence, but a full one, thick as wool, built of the space between them. Days fell into a rhythm. Nez Bigay was gone before the sun cleared the eastern mesa, a silent departure that left the cabin feeling oddly anchored. He would return in the dusk, a brace of rabbits or a ptarmigan hanging from his hand. He would place them on the cutting block outside the door, then move to the small corral to tend his horse. He never entered the cabin until she had acknowledged the food, bringing it inside. It was a negotiation, all done without a word. Ellen, for her part, Learned. She learned the way of the small stone fireplace, how to bank the juniper coals to keep a low, steady heat. She learned to grind the blue cornmeal he had left in a sack, her hands clumsy at first, then more sure. She mended her dress with thread she pulled from the hem, the needlework rough but strong. She swept the stone floor with a bundle of dry grasses. He chopped the wood, mountains of it, splitting the piñón and juniper with an economy of motion that was beautiful and terrifying. He checked his traps. He watched the ridges. They were two people living in a single, small space, but they kept a distance of 1,000 miles between them. The life she had fled was a memory of silk and suffocating perfume, of voices that never rose above a cultivated murmur but held the force of a slammed door. This life was stone and smoke and hunger, and it was quiet. The rules were simple. He provided, she maintained. They did not speak. But the body keeps its own account. The running, the cold night in the alley, the terror, the long, freezing walk. They had all been entered into a ledger. On the 4th day, the bill came due. She had been outside, fetching a skin of water from the small, snow-fed spring he had shown her, 100 yards up the canyon. The bucket felt heavy. The air, suddenly, felt too thin to breathe. The red rocks began to spin, the blue sky tilting and turning black at the edges. She made it back inside the cabin, set the bucket down, and the floor rose up to meet her. He found her there when he returned. The sun was low, painting a bar of bloody light across the floor. She was a heap of dark wool, unmoving, her face pale as ash. The water she had fetched had spilled, a dark stain already freezing on the stones. For a moment, he did not move. He stood in the doorway, his body a block against the light. This was the complication he had avoided. This was the rope. A body in the dust was one thing. A body in his home was another. He felt a cold knot of anger. Not at her, but at the world that had driven her here, at the fragility that made her a new kind of liability. He moved. He shut the door, plunging the room into the dim warmth of the fire. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her face. She was breathing, a shallow, ragged whisper of air. Her skin was on fire. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of sticks and cloth. The cabin had only one cot, his cot, a frame built into the wall with a mattress of woven grasses and his thickest blankets. He laid her there, pulling the heavy wool blanket up to her chin. She began to shake, a violent rattling tremor that shook the entire cot. Her teeth chattered. It was the desert fever, the body's final, desperate attempt to fight off the cold and the exhaustion. Nez worked quickly. He stoked the fire, piling on the wood until the small cabin was almost unbearably hot. He moved to the shelves, his large, rough hands gentle as they sorted through small leather pouches. He found what he was looking for, dried willow bark, a bitter root Atsidi Yazi had taught him to use, a pinch of something that smelled like the high pine forest. He boiled them in the small pot, the steam rising to fog the single, small window. The cabin grew dark. She began to murmur, her voice a thin, reedy sound, her hands grasping at the blanket. "No, please, Archer, do not lock it." Nez ignored the words. He had heard the words of fever before. They were ghosts. He sat on the floor, his back against the stone wall opposite the cot, and he watched. He was a guardian, not a nurse. But the fever rose. Her thrashing became more violent, her breathing more shallow. He knew that to break the fever, she had to drink. He moved to the cot, the small cup of a dark tea in his hand. He knelt beside her. "You must drink," he said, his voice low. She did not hear. He set the cup down. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, lifting her head and torso from the mattress. The movement was practiced, impersonal. He held her against his chest, her head lolling back. He saw, in the firelight, the full, ugly map of the bruises on her neck, the finger shapes, the small, sharp cut from a ring. He had seen marks like this before, on horses that had been broken with a cruel hand. He picked up the cup and held it to her lips. "Drink." She coughed, but she swallowed, her body acting from some deep, primal instinct. He made her drink all of it, the bitter brew spilling down her chin. Then he laid her back down, her head on the pillow. He did not step away. He sat back on the floor, close to the fire, close to her. He did not sleep. She woke to gray light. Her body was a single, profound ache. Her mouth tasted of ash and herbs. She was warm. She was in a bed. She turned her head, the movement sending a spike of pain through her neck. He was across the room, sitting on the floor by the door, sharpening a knife. The sound was a soft, rhythmic scrape. "Shing, shing, shing. You," she whispered. Her voice was a dry crackle. The sound stopped. He did not look at her, not immediately. He finished the stroke, tested the blade with his thumb. Then he looked up. His face was carved from the same red rock as the cabin. "You were sick," he said, "from the cold, from running." She pushed herself up on one elbow. The blanket was heavy, and smelled of him smoke, pine, and something clean, like cold air. Where did you sleep?" "I did not sleep." He put the stone and the knife down. He stood, a large shadow against the gray light of the window. He walked to the hearth, picked up the pot, and poured water. He brought it to her, in the cup. He did not hand it to her. He set it on the small crate beside the bed. He stepped back, 2 full paces, his boundary. She did not know what to say. Thank you was not enough. I am sorry was a lie. He saved her the trouble. He spoke to the fire, not to her. "When you are well, you go." He paused. "If you want." She looked at him, her heart a slow, heavy drum. He turned his head, his dark eyes finding hers. "To stay is your choice. This is not a cage." She drank the water. It was the first true choice she had been offered in a year. She recovered. Her strength returned in small, painful increments. The silence of the cabin returned, but it was different. It was no longer 2 parallel lines. It was a space they now shared. She cooked the cornmeal. He ate it. She mended one of his shirts, which had a tear in the sleeve. He found it, looked at the small, tight stitches, and wore it the next day. The V-shaped charcoal marks on the hearth, where she spilled some ash, became a small, unspoken word. One afternoon, while she was kneading dough for fry bread, she saw him stop his work. He was at the wood pile, axe in hand, but he was not looking at the wood. He was looking east, up the long slope of the ridge, to a place she could not quite see. He was seeing 2 wooden markers, gray and weathered, driven deep into the rocky soil. He was seeing a trading wagon, its canvas cover brilliant white against the red dust. He was seeing the flash of rifles from the rocks, an ambush, a betrayal by a scout he had trusted. He was seeing his brother, Yiska, pitch forward from the wagon seat, a dark flower blooming on his chest. Nez had been too far away. Scouting the high ground, he had fired his rifle, but he was 1 man against 6. By the time he got down there was only the smell of blood and burning canvas, and his brother, his hand still reaching for a rifle that was not there. The guilt was a stone he carried, heavier than any mountain. Ellen turned back to her dough, her hands shaking. She understood that gaze. She knew what it was to be haunted. She touched the scarf, which she had washed and folded, and kept in her bag. She touched it, and she was no longer in a stone cabin. She was in a parlor in Philadelphia, the air thick with roses and cigar smoke. She was wearing a new silk dress, the color of a robin's egg. Archer Beaumont was standing beside her, his hand on her arm, his fingers digging into the bone. He was smiling, but his eyes were like a winter lake. "You will learn to want this, Ellen," he had said, his voice a smooth, cold caress. "My father and yours have agreed. It is a merger of families and of fortunes. You will learn, or you will learn to pretend. Later, in the library, when she had said no, when she had pleaded, he had slapped her. Not a hard, open-handed blow. A short, sharp strike with the back of his hand, his signet ring cutting her skin. "Things do not say no, Ellen," he had whispered, his face close to hers. "Things wait, and you are my thing." The fear of being a thing, of being traded and owned, rose in her, sharp and suffocating. She slammed her fists into the dough. The outside world found them 2 days later, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Diego Salazar appeared at the edge of the clearing, his mules loaded with sacks. He and Nez spoke outside, their voices too low for Ellen to hear. But she saw the tension in Nez's shoulders. She saw Diego hand him a small, tightly wrapped package. When Diego had gone, Nez came inside. He was grim. "The trader," he said. He rarely spoke in full sentences. "He brings news." He unwrapped the package. It was coffee, fresh beans, a gift from May Larkin. "She says Hale has 2 new men, not town trash, men from the silver mines. Hard men." He looked at Ellen. "He tells the town you were taken, abducted. He tells them Judge Beaumont owns the district. He does not need a warrant. He just needs an excuse." He looked at the map on his wall, a hand-drawn thing of charcoal lines, showing water and trails. "He is searching," Nez said. "His men are in Coyote Wash. They are moving this way." The night of the fever was the night the world changed. It was the night the walls of the cabin, which had been his fortress of solitude, became something else. Ellen was lost in the fire. He had laid her on his own cot, the only soft place in the room, to keep her body from the cold stone floor. The fire was a roaring beast, filling the small space with a dry, smothering heat. But still she shook. She was a virgin. He knew. He knew it in the way she had flinched from the drunken cowboys, in the untouched, unknowing terror in her eyes. And she slept in his bed, a bed he had not shared with anyone, ever. He sat on the floor, his back against the opposite wall, his rifle across his knees. He had told himself this was a guard. He was watching the door. He was listening for Hale's men, but his eyes never left her. She thrashed, the heavy wool blankets twisting around her small body. Her breath was a ragged catch in her throat. She was speaking, her voice a thin, broken whisper. "No, no, Archer, please, the key, do not." He watched. He was a man who had built his life on not interfering. His brother, Yiska, had died because of a white man's ambush. He had sworn on his brother's cooling body that he would never again be tangled in their affairs. He would keep his boundaries. He would remain separate. This girl, she was a rope. She was a link to that world of paper laws and brute ownership he despised. She was a complication that would bring fire and ruin. His first instinct, when he had found her on the floor, had been to ride, to leave her, to let the desert take back what it was owed. It would have been a clean death. But he had not. He had lifted her. He had brewed the tea. He had held her up and forced the bitter medicine past her lips. Now, he watched. The firelight caught the wild tangle of her hair, spread across his pillow. It was dark hair, but the fire found red strands in it, like threads of copper. It was matted with sweat and the dust of the trail. He sat for hours. The moon crept across the small window, a sliver of ice. The cabin was silent, save for her breathing and the pop of the juniper logs. He felt the stone of his own solitude, a thing he had nurtured for years, begin to crack. He had chosen this. He had built this cabin with his own hands, stone by stone, as a wall against the world. Now the world was inside. She cried out, a small, terrified sound, and her hand fought its way free of the blankets, reaching for nothing. He did not move. He stayed his ground, his hands locked on his rifle. This is not your fight. This is not your kin. But his eyes followed that hand. He saw the bruises, faded now, on her neck. He saw the place where the ring had cut her. He understood this, in a way he could not have explained. He understood the mark of a hand that takes, that owns, that crushes. He had seen it on his own people. He had built his life on freedom, on the harsh, clean lines of self-sufficiency. He was Nez Bege, the one who does not step back, the one who is not owned. And he was looking at another. He had let her follow him. He had given her a place to stand. He had not known, until this moment, that in doing so, he had drawn a new line. She was on his side of it. His jaw tightened. This was not a choice made of softness. It was a choice made of stone. He would not let them take her. He would not let them drag her back to the man who had marked her like livestock. He had lost his brother to their greed. He would not lose this. He did not know her. He did not love her. He did not even, he thought, like her. She was a burden, but she was his burden. He had chosen her. In that silent, firelit room. He chose her forever. He rose, his movement as quiet as an owl's wing. He knelt by the cot. She was quieter now, the medicine pulling her down into a deeper, less troubled sleep. Her hair was spread across the pillow, and a few strands had fallen across her face. His hand, large and scarred from rock and rope, lifted. He hesitated. It was a line. It was a boundary. He did not cross boundaries. But he did. His fingers, rough as bark, brushed the soft hair back from her forehead. It was the lightest touch, barely a whisper of contact. Her skin was hot, but the hair was soft, softer than anything he had ever touched. He let his hand rest there, just for a second, a dark, protective shadow. A virgin slept in his bed. The Navajo warrior watched all night, and he had chosen. When Ellen woke, the cabin was cold. The fire had died to pale. Gray embers. Her body felt heavy, as if it belonged to someone else, but the burning was gone. She was alive. She sat up, the blankets falling away. A wave of dizziness made the stone walls swim, but she held on. She was on the cot. He was gone. She felt her head. Her hair was not the tangled, filthy mat she remembered. She touched it. It was braided, a single, thick, clumsy plait, as if done by a man who had only ever braided a horse's mane. It was tied at the end with a simple leather thong. She looked at the pillow. It smelled of cedar and wood smoke. She touched the braid, this simple, rough, impossible thing, and she understood. He had not hurt her. He had not taken. He had sat in this room all night while she was helpless, and he had guarded. He had given her his bed. He had braided her hair. She bowed her head, and for the first time since she had fled Philadelphia, she cried. They were not tears of fear or of anger. They were tears of a strange, terrifying relief. She was safe. She had fallen into the hands of a man who drew lines, and he had drawn one around her. When he returned, they did not speak of it. She was stronger. She was sitting at the table, eating a small piece of cornbread. He came in, his face set, and nodded. She nodded back. The rule was established a few days later. He had a small cut on his forearm, from a slip of his skinning knife. It was festering. He was ignoring it. She saw it, as he reached for the water bucket. "That needs to be cleaned," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He stopped. He looked at the cut, then at her. He said nothing. She tore a clean strip from a ruined petticoat, one of the few things she had, and held it out. "Please, let me." He looked at her hand, then at her face. He was a wall. She did not move. Slowly, as if lifting a great weight, he held out his arm. She took his wrist. His skin was warm, his arm hard as a tree limb. It was the first time they had touched while both were aware. The cabin was silent. She could feel the pulse under his skin. She cleaned the wound, her hand surprisingly steady. He did not flinch. When she was done, she tied the bandage. "It is necessary," she whispered. He looked at the white cloth. He looked at her. He nodded. It is necessary. That was the new law. Touch was for necessity, and it required a nod. The threat of hail made the world outside smaller, and the world inside the cabin more intense. "You must learn," he said one morning. He walked to the corner and picked up his rifle. The heavy Winchester. He held it out to her. She recoiled. "I cannot." "Hale's men will not wait for a nod," he said, his voice flat. He pushed the rifle into her hands. It was heavy, the wood smooth, the metal cold and oily. "You will learn." He took her outside. He taught her how to stand, how to breathe, how to hold the stock against her shoulder so it would not break her. The first time she fired it, the sound was a roar that shook the canyon. The recoil slammed her back, and she fell. She sat in the dust, her shoulders screaming, and she was terrified. "Again," he said. She learned. She learned to load. She learned to aim, to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. She learned to hit the piece of tin he had set on a rock at 50 yards. She learned to make the sound of the gun a part of her. And she taught him. He had his map, the charcoal drawing of the canyons. "This is not good," she said, pointing to it. "The marks, they fade." "It is my memory," he said. "You need a better one." She took a piece of charcoal and, on the smooth, flat table, she wrote WATER. He looked at the strange symbols. "Water," she said, pointing to the bucket. "These are letters. They hold the word. They hold the memory for you." He sat with her for an hour every evening. While she was strong enough, he learned. His big, calloused fingers were clumsy with the charcoal, but his mind was sharp. He learned the shapes. HORSERIFLE. He was learning a new way to map his world. One afternoon, she was sorting her ruined bag, looking for anything to patch his shirt. At the very bottom, in a small, damp-stained cloth, was a packet of seeds. Lavender. A memory of a small garden behind her house, a place of peace. On impulse, she took them. She went to the side of the cabin, where a patch of sun fell. With her fingers, she clawed at the hard, rocky soil, breaking her nails, until she had a small patch of loosened earth. She planted the seeds. It was a stupid, hopeful, desperate act. They would not grow, not here. He watched her from the doorway. He said nothing. That night, by the fire, he worked on a piece of wood. He was not a good carver. The letters were crude, deep, and uneven. The next morning, a flat piece of pinon wood was hung by the cabin door. It had 4 words carved into it. HOME. The piece of it, the small, fragile hope, was broken a few days later. She was sweeping the hearth, a task she had come to enjoy. Her broom, a bundle of twigs, dislodged a small, curled, blackened piece of paper from the cracks. She picked it up. It was from a letter. Her letter. The one she had started to her sister. The one she thought she had burned. The fire had missed this piece. The edges were black, but the words in the center were clear. "I cannot be allowed. Will be found. Is the property of Archer Beaumont." The air left her lungs. Property. Found. The words were a cage, snapping shut around her. The cabin, the rifle, the lavender seeds, the man in the trees. It was all a dream. She was a thing, a piece of property, and they were coming to find her. The fear was cold, and it settled deep. That same fear was being given a voice in Ash Mesa. The rumor that Cal and Smitty had started had grown. It had been fertilized by the $500 reward and watered by the town's boredom and prejudice. It was May Larkin who heard it first, clear and ugly. "He ain't holding her prisoner. Sheriff," one of the miners said, his voice loud with drink. "He's keeping her, like a wife, living in sin with that Navajo. She's his woman now." Sheriff Hale, who had been building a case for a heroic rescue, felt a hot flush of rage. This changed it. It made him a fool. It made the judge's property spoiled. It was no longer a rescue. It was an extraction. It was a punishment. "She's a confused girl," Hale said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He has influenced her. He's influenced her, all right?" The miner laughed. Hale walked out. He looked at the sky. The first hint of the spring rains was on the wind. The washes would be running soon. The passes would be mud. He had to move. He would not go after her as a victim. He would go after her as a fallen woman, a creature who had to be brought back to civilization. And he would go after Nez Begay as a defiler. "2 more men," he said to his deputies, "and 2 more rifles. We move out before the rain?" The burned piece of paper was a stone in her hand. Property. Ellen sat on the edge of the cot, her back rigid, staring at the word, the sense of peace she had found in the cabin, in the clumsy braid and the carved sign, had evaporated like water on a hot rock. She was a thing to be hunted, a thing to be found. Outside, the sun had set. The canyon was a bowl of ink. Nez Begay had not returned from his trap lines, but he had been gone for only an hour. But the wind was wrong. The silence was wrong. He had been watching the ridge for 2 days, ever since Diego's warning. He had seen the dust, miles to the south, a faint, unnatural smudge against the blue. Now, he sat in the rocks above the cabin, a ghost in the moonlight. He had seen them an hour ago. 4 riders, moving slow, using the shadows. They were not cowhands. They were hunters. He slid from the rocks, a shadow detaching from other shadows. He entered the cabin without a sound. Ellen flinched, a small cry escaping her. He was just there, in the center of the room, his rifle in his hand. The lamp was burning low. He did not speak. He raised one hand and extinguished the flame, pinching the wick. The cabin was plunged into a dark so total, only the faint, pulsing red of the hearth embers remained. "They are here," he whispered. His voice was not the man who learned letters. It was the scout. It was the warrior. The paper fell from Ellen's hand. Her breath stopped. "Hale!" And 3 others. He moved, a rustle in the dark, and she felt the cold, heavy barrel of the Winchester pushed into her hands. The window, the one by the hearth. She stumbled, her hands shaking, finding her way by the memory of the room. "Do not fire," he said, his voice a thread of steel. "You are a wall. You do not fire. You just watch." He was gone, melted into the deep shadow by the door itself. Outside, a boot scraped on stone. Then, silence, a long, stretched-out minute. A voice, booming, false, and full of its own authority. "Nez Begay, this is Sheriff Judson Hale. I know you are in there with her." Ellen peered through the small window. She could see them now. 4 shapes, 4 men on foot, their horses left back on the trail. One held a lantern, and he lifted it high. The yellow light splashed across the front of the cabin, illuminating the small porch, the water barrel, and the crudely carved sign that read, "Home." Hale stepped into the light. He was wearing his badge outside his heavy coat. He had his pistol in his hand. Beside him stood Cal and Smitty, the 2 drunks from the alley, now armed with rifles. The 4th man was a stranger, thick and bearded, with a mean, impatient look. "Ellen Ward," Hale shouted, and the name was a violation. "I have a warrant for your protection. You are a ward of the court. You have been deceived by this savage. Come out now and the law will protect you." "Property belongs to the court." Ellen's stomach turned to ice. She pressed her shoulder against the cold stone, the rifle a useless, heavy weight. "She is not property." The voice came from the cabin, but it seemed to come from the stone itself. Nez was invisible. Hale was startled. He raised his pistol toward the sound. "Begay, you are charged with abduction, with violating a ward of the court. Send her out. This is your only warning." "You have no paper," Nez said. His voice was calm. "This is my paper," Hale snarled, slapping the tin star on his chest. "And I have witnesses, Cal Smitty, you saw him take her." "We seen it," Sheriff Cal yelled, his voice cracking. "He took her, forced her right out of town." "This is done," Hale said. He nodded to the fourth man, the miner. "She belongs to the law. Bring her." The miner smiled. He did not care about the law. He spat. "To hell with this talk." He raised his rifle and fired. The shot was a deafening crack. The bullet splintered the thick plank of the door, just inches from where Nez was hidden. The world stopped. Then it moved. Smitty, trying to be a hero, made his move. He broke from the group, running low, trying to get to the side of the porch. He would get to the window. He would be the one to grab her. He was up close, rushing the house. Boom! The sound was from Nez's rifle. It was not a wild shot. It was a single, deliberate, precise answer. Smitty stopped. He grunted, a sound of surprise. He looked down at his chest, as if confused. He was still trying to raise his pistol. Boom! The second shot. It was just as precise. It hit Smitty in the same place. The force of it threw him backward. A broken doll, his pistol clattering on the rocks. He did not move again. "He is hit! Smitty is down!" the miner screamed, firing wildly at the dark shape of the door. Bullets thudded into the wood, into the stone. They were high. They were panicked. Hale dove behind the woodpile, firing his pistol. "Cover, get him covered, Cal, the window!" Cal, his courage half whiskey, half terror, did as he was told. He ran for the other side of the cabin, for Ellen's window. He saw her, a pale shape in the dark. "There you are, you witch!" he screamed. He did not try to shoot. He lunged, shoving his rifle through the small window frame, shattering the glass. He was trying to get leverage, to hook her, to drag her out. The barrel of the gun jammed hard into her side, into her hip. The pain, the cold metal, the violation. It was Archer's hand. It was the locked room. It was the signet ring. It was property. Ellen was not the girl from Philadelphia. She was not a ward of the court. She was a wall. She was a home. She was not thinking. She was not aiming. She roared, a sound torn from her deepest roots. She dropped her own rifle and grabbed his, the one he had shoved through the window. She yanked it, pulling him off balance, and shoved her own rifle, the one Nez had given her, hard against Cal's side. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, muffled by flesh and wool. Cal screamed, a high, thin, bubbling sound. He dropped his own rifle, which was still half in the cabin, and staggered back. Clutching his side, he fell to his knees, his hands dark with blood in the moonlight. Silence. A total, absolute silence, broken only by the wind and Cal's wet, gasping sobs. From behind the woodpile, Hale's voice, shaking with rage. They shot Cal! They shot them both!" Nez stepped from the doorway, a shadow against the dark. He did not raise his rifle. He just stood there. The miner had had enough. He looked at Smitty, a dark heap. He looked at Cal, writhing on the ground. He looked at Nez, standing on the porch, a man made of night. He dropped his rifle. "I am out," the miner said, his voice hoarse. "This ain't my fight. This ain't paying enough." He put his hands up and started backing away. Hale stood. His face was a mask of fury. He was alone. His posse was broken. He had failed. "This is not over. Be gay," he spat, his pistol still in his hand, but hanging at his side. "This is not over. You shot my deputies. You murdered one. You shot another. That is the law. That is a hanging." He turned to Ellen, who was a ghost at the broken window. "And you are as guilty as him. You are a whore, a killer." He pointed his finger. "I am coming back. I am coming back with the court. I am coming back with a federal marshal, and I will see you both hang." He backed away, grabbed the miner's arm. and together they dragged the screaming, wounded Cal into the darkness. They left Smitty's body where it lay. The cabin was quiet. Ellen walked, her legs wooden, to the center of the room. Her hands, her arms, her whole body was shaking. A tremor so deep she could not control it. The rifle. She had fired. She stumbled to the water bucket, her hand outstretched for the dipper. She could not, her fingers would not close. She clattered it against the side of the bucket. A small, pathetic noise. She was going to be sick. Nez came inside. He quietly barred the door. A heavy wooden plank sliding into place. He walked to the hearth, his movements slow, deliberate. He added a single log to the embers. The small flame that licked up cast his face in deep shadow. He watched her. She was failing. She could not get the water. She was shaking apart. He did not move. He did not cross the room. He did not offer a hand. He did not speak. He did not say, "It is all right." He did not say, "You did well." He did not touch her. He stood by the fire, and he waited. He gave her the dignity of her own fight. He let her be. She saw his stillness. She saw his respect. It was a respect harder than any comfort. She put her second hand on the dipper. She forced her fingers to close. She lifted it, the water sloshing, her arms aching. She brought it to her lips and drank. The water was cold. It tasted of iron and earth. She drank, and the shaking, by slow, agonizing degrees, began to lessen. It did not stop, but it lessened. She set the dipper down. She looked at him, the man across the room, the man who had seen her kill. I shot him," she whispered. Nez looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the new, small firelight. "You guarded the house," he said. He turned back to the fire. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice quiet, but hard as the stone around them. Freedom must be guarded. By dawn, Hale's party had reached Ash Mesa. They were a grim sight. Cal was barely alive, slung over the miner's horse. Hale was walking, his face black with soot and fury. May Larkin was sweeping her boardwalk. She had been waiting. "Rough night, Sheriff," she called, her voice sharp in the morning air. Hale stopped. The whole street was watching. Wardell from the station, the blacksmith from his forge, that murdering savage. "Be-gay," Hale yelled, his voice cracking. "He laid an ambush. He shot 2 of my men, murdered Smitty." May stopped sweeping. "Is that so?" she said, her voice loud, carrying. "That is not what I heard." "What did you hear?" Hale sneered. "I heard," May said, pitching her voice for the crowd. "From Diego Salazar. He was moving his mules last night. He was in the canyon. He heard you, Sheriff." Hale's face went white. "He said he heard you scream, 'Burn him out.' He said he heard your men fire first. 4, maybe 5 shots into the cabin before anyone fired back." The crowd murmured. That is a lie," Hale stammered. "Is it?" May said. "Diego is not a liar. He said it sounded to him like a man and a woman defending their home from attackers. Attackers led by a man who did not even have a warrant. Sounds like self-defense. Sheriff, sounds like you went to take a girl who did not want to be taken, and you got a fight you did not expect." She looked at Cal, who was moaning. "Or maybe," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr, "the girl shot him herself. Good for her." Hale's face was purple. He had lost his posse. He had lost his narrative. He looked at the faces of the town, at their closed, watching eyes. They were not on his side. He stormed past her, toward his office. "It is murder," he screamed, "and they will hang for it." But May Larkin had already planted the seed. The story was not abducted girl rescued. It was free woman defends her home. And in Ash Mesa, a town built on fighting for what was yours. That story had teeth. The body of Smitty lay in the cold morning light, a stark, broken thing. Nez had carried him, with a strange, grim respect, to a shallow cleft in the rocks 100 yards from the cabin, and covered him with stones. "No man is left for the vultures," he had said. It was the only requiem. Cal's blood was a dark, rust-colored stain on the porch that Ellen had scrubbed, her hands shaking until her knuckles were raw. The cabin was a fortress with a breached wall. The window was a gaping hole, boarded clumsily with planks from a broken crate. The sign, "Home," was still there, but it felt like a mockery. The fight had been won. The war had just begun. In Ash Mesa, Sheriff Judson Hale was a man walking through fire. May's story had spread, and the town was divided, a split as deep as a canyon. But Hale was not a man to be beaten by saloon gossip. He was a man of paper, and he knew paper was the white man's strongest weapon. He sent a long, furious telegram to the district judge in Prescott. He did not mention May Larkin. He did not mention Diego Salazar's lies. He wrote of a brutal, unprovoked attack. He wrote of a murdered deputy, a crippled one. He used the words savage, defilement, and abduction. He heavily implied that the girl was now a crazed, willing captive, a woman lost to sin and barbarism. Judge Easton Beaumont, 1,000 miles away, had already greased the wheels. The district judge, who owed his position to Beaumont's influence, wired back in less than a day. He issued a full territorial warrant for the arrest of Nez Begay, for murder and for Ellen Ward, as an accessory to murder. The warrant gave Hale new power. It was no longer a local matter. He was now an arm of the territorial court. The warrant authorized him to employ any agents necessary. He went to the railroad office. The railroad had its own police, special agents who were not drunken cowhands. They were hard, disciplined men who protected the company's assets. And Judge Beaumont owned a great deal of the railroad's assets. 2 days later, 4 new men rode into town. They did not wear badges. They wore neat, dark suits and carried new model repeating rifles. They did not go to the saloon. They reported directly to Hale. Diego Salazar saw them arrive. He did not even stop to unhitch his mules. He turned, rode them hard into the hills, and arrived at the cabin just after dusk, his horse blowing, his face grim. Nez met him outside. Ellen watched from the broken window. "You must go," Diego said, his voice low and urgent. "Now. Tonight. It is not just Hale. He has a warrant. For murder. He has railroad men. 4 of them. They are not like the others. They are not stupid. They are trackers." Nez looked at the stone cabin. He had built it with his own hands. He looked at the ridge where his brother was buried. "Where?" Nez asked. "South. Into the Malpais. They will expect you to go north. Into the mountains. Go south. I will meet you at Red Gate Pass in 3 days. I will bring what I can." Diego pressed a heavy sack into his hands. "It is all the ammunition I had, and some flour. God be with you." He was gone, a ghost into the darkness. Nez came inside. He did not have to speak. The word was in the air. "Run!" He moved with a terrible, silent efficiency. He packed 2 water skins. He took the flour, the ammunition, a strip of dried meat. He rolled his blankets. He handed Ellen her own, smaller roll. "This is all?" she asked, her voice small. "We will not be walking," he said. He went to the small, hidden corral behind the cabin and returned, leading his horse, a tough, rangy paint. He threw a saddle on it. "I cannot ride," she said, her panic rising. "You will ride. I will walk." He threw his own pack over his shoulders. He looked at her. "We must go. The dry wash. It is the only way to hide our tracks." He led the horse, and she stumbled behind him. Into the night. They did not go up. Into the high country they went down, into the cracked, pale scar of Coyote Wash. The moon was a sliver, giving just enough light to see the stones. He led the horse on the gravel bed. the hooves making a soft, crunching sound that was lost in the vast, empty night. He walked beside her, his own feet in their soft moccasins, finding the sand, leaving no mark. They moved for hours. The tension was a living thing, a third person with them in the wash. Ellen's body ached, but she did not complain. Every small sound, every gust of wind made her jump. They were 2 days into the wilderness, moving through a landscape of black, volcanic rock and twisted, dead trees, when the sky turned yellow. Nez had just pulled them into a shallow overhang of rock when the wind began to scream. It came from the west, a solid wall of grit and dust that blotted out the sun. It was not a breeze, it was not a wind. It was a physical, malevolent thing. The world disappeared, replaced by a howling, suffocating brown. "The sandstorm!" He yelled over the roar, pulling her deeper into the cleft. He wrapped a piece of cloth around his face. She did his, her hands shaking. This was a new adversary. Hale's men were a threat they could understand. This was the land itself, trying to scour them from its face. They huddled together, not for warmth, but for survival. The wind shrieked, a high, thin sound like a dying animal. Sand forced its way into her clothes, her hair, her mouth. She had never felt so small, so helpless. She was a thing again, but this time, a thing to be buried by the earth. She watched Nez. He was perfectly still, his eyes closed, his face turned toward the rock. He was not fighting. He was enduring. He was a stone, and the wind was just another stone, moving fast. She tried to be like him. She closed her eyes. She listened. Nez had taught her to listen. To the birds, to the water, and to the wind. The wind was not one sound, it was many. There was the high, thin scream, but beneath it, there was a deeper, roaring, grinding sound. And she, her ear pressed to the rock, could feel a vibration. The sound changed. The high, thin scream was still there, but the deep, grinding roar was fading. It was moving. She opened her eyes. She touched his arm. He started, his hand flying to his knife. "The wind!" she yelled, her voice raw. "It is changing the deep sound. It is moving south." He looked at her, his eyes suddenly sharp, analytical. He turned his head, listening. He had been sheltering, hunkering down. She had been listening. He pressed his own ear to the rock. A minute passed. He pulled back. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like surprise, like respect. "You are right," he shouted. "The main wall of the storm is passing us. This is just the edge. We can move." "Move in this." "The wind hides us," he said, his voice a hard, sudden command. "It hides our tracks. It hides our sound. I know a place, a better place. We can be there by nightfall." He grabbed his pack, as she was fumbling with hers. A savage gust of wind tore at the shallow cave. It ripped at her bag, which was poorly tied. A dark, silken thing was torn from it. Her scarf, the one from Philadelphia. It flew from her pack, a dark bird, and was instantly shredded, torn to pieces and lost in the brown. Screaming chaos. She watched it go. She felt a sharp, sudden pang, not of loss, but of liberation. Her old name, her old life. It was gone, eaten by the wind. They moved. It was a blind, desperate march, their heads down, their bodies leaning into the wind, but they moved. They found the new shelter just as the last of the light died. It was a true cave, a deep, dry hollow in the red rock. It was safe. They were caked in grit, their skin raw, their eyes burning. Nez sat, his back to the wall. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, hard, dusty piece of fry bread. It was the last of their food. He looked at it. Then, with his knife, he carefully cut it into 2 exact, equal halves. He held one piece out to her. She took it, the small gesture of fairness, of equal shares. In the face of this was more intimate than any touch. She ate, the bread like sand in her mouth. The wind still howled outside, but it was muffled. They were safe. She looked at him. He was a shadow, his face streaked with dirt. "I am a burden," she said, her voice quiet. "I know this. You could be free. You could be in the mountains. They would never find you. But you are here, with me." He did not look at her. He finished his bread. "We are here," he said, as if that explained everything. "When this is over," she said, her voice finding a sudden, unexpected strength. When we get through this, I am not running anymore. I am not leaving." He turned his head. "I want to stay," she said, the words feeling heavy and true on her tongue. "Not because I am grateful, not because I owe you, not for debt." She reached out and touched the cold, red stone of the cave wall. "Because I choose this place, this life." He looked at her. The wind howled. A long moment passed. He had heard her words of fever, her words of fear. Now he heard these. He did not smile. He did not offer a promise. He just nodded. Once. A short, solid, accepting gesture. It was an oath. It was enough. Back in Ash Mesa, a different kind of storm was brewing. May Larkin and Atsidi Yazzie had met in the back room of the saloon, a small, vocal group of townsfolk, led by the blacksmith who was angry about losing Smitty and Cal as drinking partners, had gathered on the street, demanding Hale bring the killers to justice. Atsidi Yazzie had stepped out to meet them. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, in a traditional blanket. "You speak of justice," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Whose justice? The paper justice from Santa Fe, bought by a rich man's gold?" "They killed Smitty," the blacksmith shouted. "They defended their home," May Larkin yelled from her doorway. Atsidi Yazzie held up a hand. "You ask for justice. I ask for respect. You demand the law. I demand a choice, a woman's choice. She was property. She ran. She found a home. She defended it. And you small, loud men, you want to drag her back to her cage, because another man's paper tells you to, because of money." She looked at them, her eyes like black, polished stones. "Shame. You should feel shame." The crowd had muttered and broken apart. It was not a victory, but it was a battle. At that same moment, Diego Salazar was riding hard from the south. He carried a packet, given to him by a contact at the Santa Fe telegraph office. It was a copy of Judge Beaumont's private expense ledger, and a copy of the first telegram, the one that referred to our lost property, and authorized all purchase costs for recovery. Hale had his paper warrant, but Diego had the truth. The air at Red Gate Pass was thin and cold. The pass itself was a deep, narrow cut in the rock, a bottleneck where the trail from the volcanic Malpais widened into the high valleys. It was a place of passage, one way in, one way out. It was a place for an ambush, or a stand. They had been waiting for 2 days since the storm. Their food was gone. Their bodies were scraped raw from the sand. They were 2 small, tired figures in an ocean of red rock. The only thing they had left was the promise of a meeting. Nez was high on the ridge, a still, patient watcher. When he saw the dust, it was not the single, fast-moving horse of Diego Salazar. It was a slower group, 3 riders. He slid down the rocks to the shallow cave where Ellen was waiting. "He comes," he said, his voice flat. But not alone. Ellen's hand went to the rifle. It had become a part of her, a cold, heavy extension of her will. They waited. The riders cleared the pass. It was Diego, his face grim, his mules loaded. But behind him rode May Larkin, her red hair tied in a tight bun, her expression thunderous. She looked stiff and uncomfortable on the back of a mule, and behind her, looking pale and terrified, but sitting straight in his saddle, was Reverend Hollis. Reverend Ellen stepped out, her voice a croak of disbelief. "No time for greetings. Child!" May snapped, sliding ungracefully from the mule. She slapped her leg. "I hate these animals. Diego, the water—" Diego was already unstrapping a heavy water skin and a thick sack of food. "Hale is behind us," he said to Nez, his voice low and urgent. "He and his railroad men, 4 of them, and he has 2 new volunteers from town who want the reward. 6 men. They are 2, maybe 3 hours back. They found our trail." "Then we run," Ellen said, her heart sinking. "We keep running." "No," May said. She shoved a piece of paper into Ellen's hand. "The time for running is done. The time for fighting is done. This is the time for law." Ellen looked at the paper. It was the telegram, the one that called her property. "And this," Diego said, handing a thin ledger book to Reverend Hollis, "is his money, the $500, the price of a human." I do not understand." Ellen said, "He has a warrant for murder." "He has a warrant based on a lie," May said, her voice hard. "We have the truth, and we have a witness." She looked at Hollis. The Reverend was pale, but his eyes were clear. "I am a man of God, Miss Ward, but I am also a citizen of this territory. I will not stand by and watch a man use the law to commit a crime." Nez looked at them, his eyes narrow. "This is a trap," he said to Diego. "You have led them here." "No," Diego said. "I have led us here. Red Gate. It is a good place. They come in. They do not come out. Unless we say, we will not fight them with guns. Nez," he tapped his head, "we will fight them with this, with the truth. But," he added, "it is good to have a high vantage point, just in case." The plan was simple. It was terrifying. It was May's. "Hale wants his dramatic capture," she said, her voice echoing in the small cave. "He wants to be the hero, dragging you back. We will give him his stage, but we will write the words." They would not hide. They would wait in the pass, in the open. Reverend Hollis would be there. He would be the notary. He would be the conscience. An hour later, they were ready. The sun was setting, filling the pass with shadows that were purple and blood red. May had a lantern, and she set it on a flat rock in the very center of the narrow trail. A single point of yellow light. Ellen stood beside it. She had washed her face with the last of the water. Her hair was tied back. She was not a victim. She was not a prisoner. She was a plaintiff. Nez was with her. He stood 2 paces back, in the deeper shadow, his rifle held lightly in one hand. He was a wall, waiting. May and Hollis stood on a small ledge of rock, 10 feet up, to the side, visible, witnesses. Hollis had his notebook open, a pencil stub in his hand, and high above, in the rocks that formed the gate itself, Diego Salazar was prone, his own rifle sighted on the pass. The sound of hoofbeats came, sharp on the stones. They were not moving fast. They were confident. Sheriff Judson Hale rode into the small circle of light. He pulled his horse to a stop. His 4 railroad men fanned out behind him, their rifles up, their faces hard and professional. The 2 men from town, volunteers, looked nervous. Hale's eyes glittered. He saw Ellen. He saw Nez. He saw May and the Reverend. He did not see Diego. He smiled, a thin, cruel splitting of his lips. "Well, a welcoming party. You have saved me the trouble of hunting." He swung down from his horse. "Nez Begay, you are under arrest for the murder of Deputy Smitty and the attempted murder of Deputy Cal Ellen Ward. You are under arrest as accessory to these crimes." He pulled the warrant from his coat, unfolding it with a snap. "I have a territorial warrant. It is over." "No, Sheriff." Ellen's voice was clear. It did not shake. "It is not. You have a paper, But we have the truth." "What is this nonsense?" Hale sneered. "She is mad. Seize them." The railroad men did not move. Their leader, a man with cold, gray eyes, looked at May and Hollis. "This is an unusual arrest. Sheriff, what are they doing here?" "They are witnesses to the law," Hale shouted. "We are witnesses," Reverend Hollis called out, his voice trembling but loud. "To this—" He held up the telegram. A telegram from Judge Easton Beaumont. "Sir, it refers to Miss Ward as our lost property." The gray-eyed railroad man's expression did not change, but he did not move forward. "Property," he said, his voice quiet. "And a ledger," Hollis continued, his voice gaining strength, showing a payment of $500 to Sheriff Hale for services rendered in the Ward recovery. "We are railroad men, sir," he said to the leader. "We are not bounty hunters. We are not slave catchers." Hale's face went white. The two volunteers from town looked at each other and took a step back. "It is a lie," Hale screamed. He was losing control. He had lost his narrative. "It is a trick. They are killers. She is a whore. They are resisting arrest. Seize them." "I said—" One of the railroad men, younger, more nervous, took Hale at his word. He raised his rifle. He did not aim at a person. He aimed at the light. He fired. The bullet struck the lantern. Glass shattered. The light died. The pass was plunged into absolute, total darkness. "Fire!" Hale was screaming. "Fire! You fools!" Another man fired. The muzzle flash, a brief, violent orange, illuminated a terrible scene. Nez was no longer by the rock. He was in motion. He was not a man. He was a shadow. He was the darkness. There was a grunt, a scream, the sound of a heavy body hitting the ground. The nervous railroad man who had fired first was down. Nez already passed him. "Light!" the gray-eyed leader yelled, firing his pistol into the dark. Toward the sound, another muzzle flash. It showed Nez, unarmed, his rifle on the ground, using his hands. He was fighting one of the volunteers, and in the dark, the man's rifle was useless. It was short. It was brutal. The second volunteer panicked. He turned and ran, scrambling back down the pass. Hale was fumbling, trying to light a match. "Kill him! Kill him!" The gray-eyed leader saw Nez, a darker shadow, moving toward him. He raised his pistol to fire again. But Hale, in his panic, had gotten his match lit. He raised his own pistol, aiming at the shadow of Nez. He fired. The bullet, fired wildly, missed Nez entirely. It struck the stone wall, but the flash, so close to his face, blinded him, and the recoil from his unsteady hand sent his own left hand, which was holding the matchbook, scraping hard against the rock. A scream, not of a wound from a bullet, but of pain and rage. At that exact second, the railroad leader, his eyes now adjusted, saw his target. He saw Nez. He saw Hale. He made his choice. He did not fire. He was a professional. And this was a disaster. Hale was on his knees. His left hand was a bloody, shredded mess, torn by the rock and the percussion. He had dropped his pistol. He saw it, gleaming faintly, on the ground. He lunged for it. His right hand, his good hand, closing around the grip. He saw a shadow move. He saw Nez standing, watching him. I will kill you," Hale whimpered, raising the pistol, his arm shaking. Crack! A single rifle shot. It came from high above. It came from the sky. The pistol was torn from Hale's hand, spinning into the darkness, a clatter of metal on stone. A voice, calm and clear, echoed from the cliffs. "The next one, Sheriff, Diego Salazar called, will be between your eyes." Silence. Hale was sobbing, a broken, wheezing sound, clutching his ruined left hand. May Larkin walked calmly down the rocks, holding a second, unlit lantern. She struck a match. the small flame revealing the chaos. 2 men were down, groaning, but alive. The gray-eyed leader was standing, his pistol lowered, his face a mask of disgust. The 3rd railroad man was helping his wounded partner. The town volunteers were gone. Nez was standing, his knife in his hand. He was breathing hard. He looked at Hale, a predator who had been denied his kill. He took 1 step toward the kneeling, weeping sheriff. No. Ellen. She stepped forward. She put herself directly between Nez and Hale. She faced the man who had hunted her. Her back was to the man who had saved her. Ellen, Nez said, his voice a low growl. Move. No, she said, her voice quiet. She did not take her eyes off Hale. It is done. Hale looked up, his face streaked with tears and dirt, twisted in agony. You... I am Ellen Ward, she said, her voice clear in the sudden, absolute quiet of the pass. I am not a ward. I am not a whore. I am not property. She stood there, small and unshakable, a shield. I am free. Nez looked at her back. He watched the small, proud set of her shoulders. He saw the way she stood, a fortress of her own. He let out a long, slow breath. He slid his knife back into its sheath. The gray-eyed railroad man holstered his pistol. This arrest, he said, his voice formal, is over. We were deceived. We will take our wounded, and we will take this man. He nodded at Hale. On what charge? May asked, her voice sharp. On the charge, the man said, of fraud, of endangerment of railroad agents, and of whatever this is. He kicked the ledger with his boot. We will testify, in Prescott, to everything we saw. May and Reverend Hollis walked down. Hollis was still holding his notebook. I have the record, he said, his voice shaking but firm. I have it all. The words, the shots, Hale's actions. Good, May said. She looked down at Hale, who was a broken man, cowering on the ground. Get up, Judson. You are coming back to Ash Mesa, and you are going to be a guest in your own jail. Justice, Ellen saw, was not a piece of paper from a rich man's desk. It was a community. It was a man on a cliff. It was a woman with a lantern, and a priest with a pencil. It was the people who chose to believe you. The ride back to Ash Mesa was silent. It was a strange procession that moved through the dawn. The gray-eyed railroad man, whose name was Mr. Coulter, rode at the front. His 2 remaining men rode behind him, one of them wounded but upright, the other leading the horse that carried their unconscious companion. Behind them, his hands bound and his bloody, bandaged arm in a sling, rode Judson Hale. He was tied to his own saddle. May Larkin and Reverend Hollis rode next, and behind them, a full 20 yards back, as if in a separate world, rode Nez Begay on his paint. Ellen was seated behind him, her hands not on his waist, but on the cantle of the saddle, holding on, her back straight. Diego Salazar had already melted back into the high rocks, his work done. They entered the town not as heroes or as captives, but as a grim, unavoidable fact. Wardell, sweeping the platform, saw them first. His jaw dropped. He saw Hale, a prisoner. He saw Ellen Ward, alive, and riding with the Navajo. Mr. Coulter did not stop at the saloon. He rode directly to the sheriff's office, which was also the jail. He dismounted, and with a quiet, firm authority, he took the keys from Hale's pocket and unlocked the cell. He cut Hale's bonds and, with a nod to May, gestured for the former sheriff to enter. The charge is fraud, Coulter said, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, and misuse of territorial authority. My report will be on the wire to the U.S. Marshal in Prescott by noon. The legal fallout was not a storm. It was a quiet, steady unraveling. Coulter's report, combined with the detailed, notarized testimony of Reverend Hollis, was a dam against which Judge Easton Beaumont's power broke, the railroad. Embarrassed by the misuse of its agents, supported Coulter's version. The district judge, who had issued the warrant, was quietly investigated. The words fraud, coercion, and conspiracy to kidnap were whispered in the halls of Santa Fe. Beaumont's name, once a hammer, became a synonym for disgrace. He did not fight. He cut his losses. He retreated. Judson Hale was gone by the end of the week, taken by Coulter's men to Prescott to await a federal trial. He was a broken man, a small man who had overplayed a rich man's hand. But the paper of the law was one thing. The law of the town was another. Ellen was in May's saloon. It was quiet. The day after Hale had been taken, she was drinking a cup of tea, her hands still raw from the sandstorm. "The law has its say," May said, wiping a glass. "But the town has its memory. You are free from Hale, but you are not yet free from them." She nodded to the street. "What do I do?" Ellen asked. "You plant your flag," May said. "Not with a gun, with a pen." That afternoon, they gathered. It was not a trial. It was a witnessing. In the center of the saloon, May Larkin laid a single, clean sheet of paper on a table. Reverend Hollis sat at the head, his spectacles on his nose, his notebook open beside him. One by one, they came. At Sidi Yazzie, the first— She did not speak English, but she looked at Ellen, a long, deep, appraising look. She saw the girl who had run. She saw the woman who had stayed. She nodded. She could not write her name. So she dipped her thumb in Hollis's inkpot and left a clear, dark mark at the bottom of the page. Diego Salazar came next. He smiled at Ellen. "You fight better than you run. Amiga," he said. He signed his name with a bold, flourishing hand. May Larkin signed, her script large and clear. Then Reverend Hollis looked at Ellen. "In your own words, child," he said gently, "what is your will?" Ellen took the pen. Her hand did not shake. She wrote, in the clear, precise script she had been taught in Philadelphia, "My name is Ellen Ward. I am of sound mind and body. I am not a captive. I am not a ward of any court. I am a free woman. I reside in the Chuska Valley by my own free choice, and under the protection of no man, but in the partnership of Nezbege. I am home." She signed her name. Hollis took the paper, blew on the ink, and folded it. He put it inside his own Bible. "The town," he said quietly, "now has its own warrant, a warrant of witness. You are free, Ellen." They went back. The cabin was scarred. The broken window, boarded with pine, was a wound. The porch rail was splintered. The bloodstain was a ghost on the stones. For a long time they just stood there. The silence was heavy. The fight was over. The hard part had begun. Nez spoke first. "The wood," he said. "It is wrong." He went to his pile of cured juniper. He found a long, straight, perfect piece. He began to work. He did not just replace the splintered porch rail. He took the whole thing down. He rebuilt it, his movements slow, measured, and perfect. He was not just fixing. He was redrawing the line. He was building the boundary of their home, and this time, he was building it to last. Ellen watched him for a day. She watched the long, smooth strokes of his knife as he planed the wood. She watched him fit the joints, not with nails, but with carved wooden pegs. Then she went to town. She did not ask May for a loan. She brought 2 of the rabbits Nez had trapped, and she sold them to the blacksmith for 20 cents. She took that money to the dry goods store. She bought a small, new pane of glass and a small tin of blue paint, the color of the sky, just after a storm. She carried them back. Nez did not ask what she was doing. He watched as she chipped away the old, broken glass. She carefully, clumsily, set the new pane. Then, with a small brush, she painted the frame, the new wood, the new glass. It was a bright, shocking, beautiful square of blue, a defiant mark of life. The next week, a dog appeared. It was a thin, yellow creature, one ear torn, its ribs a washboard. It was a camp dog, abandoned by some miner or trapper. It stood at the edge of the clearing, 50 yards away, its head low, watching. Ellen put a scrap of cornbread on a rock. "It is hungry," she said. Nez grunted. "It is a coyote eater. It will not stay." But it did. The next day, it was 20 yards closer. Ellen put out more food. The dog ate, but would not let her near. It watched them, its wary eyes moving from Ellen to Nez, from the door to the woodpile. One evening, after 3 days, Nez sat on the new porch rail, mending a strap. The dog crept forward, slowly, and lay down by the steps, its head on its paws, its eyes on the trail. It let out a long, quiet sigh. Nez looked at the dog. He looked at Ellen, who was standing in the blue-framed window. He nodded. Once, the dog was a sign. A wild thing had chosen to be safe. It was, Ellen thought, a mark of peace. The lavender sprouted. She had forgotten about it. The day after the first soft spring rain, she saw it. Not a flower, just a tiny, pale green, almost invisible shoot, pushing its way up through the rocky soil by the cabin wall. It was the most stubborn, beautiful thing she had ever seen. That night, the rain came again, a gentle, steady sound on the roof. It was not the violence of the sandstorm. It was a cleansing. It was a promise. Nez had taken a rag and some oil, and he was rubbing it into the home sign. The letters, once crude, now looked dark and deep and permanent. Reverend Hollis visited. He rode out one clear, bright afternoon, his Bible in his saddlebag. He sat on their porch and drank a cup of water. "The town is quiet," he said. "Beaumont's name is gone from the ledger at the bank. The world, it seems, has moved on." He looked at them. They sat, not close, but comfortable in the same space. "The church, my church, has rules, for things, for man and wife." "We are not," Ellen said, her voice quiet. "That." "I see," Hollis said. He looked at Nez, who was watching the ridge, his face as still as stone. "What you are," Hollis said, "is a fact, but the world likes its facts to have names." Nez turned his head. "We have a name," he said. He touched the sign. "Home." "And yet," Hollis said, "a promise is a good thing to witness." They did not have a wedding. There was no dress. There were no rings. There were no words of God. The next day, just as the sun was warming the rocks, they walked. Nez led her, not up to the high ridge, but to a place in the canyon, a wide, flat expanse of red sandstone, smooth as a table. Reverend Hollis, who had stayed the night, followed. Nez stopped. He put his hand on the rock. It was already warm from the morning sun. "This is the stone," he said. "It is old. It remembers." He looked at Ellen. She put her hand down, next to his. The rock was warm against her palm. "I am not your master," Nez said, his voice low. "For her and the stone, I am not your owner. I will not hold you." Ellen looked at their hands, his dark and scarred, hers pale and healing. "I am not your burden," she said, her voice clear. "I am not your captive. I am not your debt. I will not cage you." They said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. It was not a promise to stay forever. It was a promise of freedom, a promise to let the other be, to let them choose, every day. Reverend Hollis took out his small notebook. He wrote, "Today, I witnessed a bond, not of law, not of church, but of stone and choice. They are not bound to each other. They are bound beside each other. It is a thing the world should learn from." He did not say, "I now pronounce you." He just closed his book and nodded. "The day is warm." He said, "It is a good day." They walked back to the cabin. Ellen, who had been a runner, felt the earth solid under her feet. She was not running, she was staying. Nez, who had been a loner, walked with a partner at his side. He was not a guardian of a ghost. He was a keeper of a home. The pace of their life slowed to the rhythm of the earth. The long, soft sentences of the spring days replaced the short, sharp cracks of the rifle. Freedom, they learned, was not a single, desperate moment in a pass. It was the daily, quiet labor of methodically. It was keeping the fire. It was mending the roof. It was respecting the blue-painted line and the quiet of the man who sat beside it. The spring was not an event. It was a slow, deliberate negotiation with the land. The iron-hard frost of the high desert reluctantly let go. The wind, which for months had been a blade, softened. It began to carry the scent of damp earth, of pinon resin, of a world unlocking. The snow receded from the Chuska peaks, a slow, high-country retreat. And one morning, they woke to a new sound. It was not a sound Ellen had ever heard, but it was one Nez had been waiting for. It was a quiet, insistent, liquid whisper. He was out of the cabin in an instant, not with his rifle, but with a strange, alert stillness. He walked, not to the ridge, but down, toward the canyon floor. Ellen followed. She stood on the high bank and watched. Coyote Wash, which she had only known as a pale, cracked scar in the earth, a graveyard of dry stones, was moving. A thin, silver-gray ribbon of water, thick with melt and mud, was pushing its way down the arroyo. It was not a flood. It was not a river. It was a pulse. It was the land's own heart, starting to beat again. Nez knelt. He touched the water. He let the cold mud run through his fingers. He was a man seeing a ghost return, a good ghost. He looked at the dark, wet soil the water had left on the banks. He stood, and using the heel of his boot, he drew a line in the damp earth. A long, straight boundary. "Here," he said. He did not need to explain. This was the place. He had a small, leather pouch he had kept hidden. A pouch of seed corn. The hard, resilient blue kernels his people had grown for 1,000 years. He had kept it through the loss of his brother, through his isolation, a kernel of a past he had not known how to replant. He poured the seeds into Ellen's hand. They planted. It was a new rhythm. It was not the short, sharp rhythm of the rifle, or the weary rhythm of survival. It was the slow, hopeful, patient rhythm of the future. They worked side by side, pushing the seeds into the damp, cold earth. It was a new, shared labor. A few weeks later, the first signs appeared. Small, brilliant green flags, tight as spear points, pushed up from the brown earth. They were small, green declarations of hope. A garden had been declared in the wilderness. The land was healing, and so were the people. But there was one last piece of the past that needed to be settled. Ellen had a small, leather-bound pouch at the bottom of her ruined carpet bag. It held the last paper chains her birth certificate from Philadelphia, a letter from her father discussing the merger with the Beaumont family. These were the documents that had defined her, the papers that had named her as property. One evening, when the air was soft, she sat by the fire, her back to Nez, who was outside, mending a strap in the twilight. He knew this was her own ceremony. He gave her the boundary of his absence. She took the papers out. She looked at the fine, looped script, the signatures, the legal language that had almost been her death sentence. Then, one by one, she fed them to the fire. She watched the paper curl, turn black, and flare. She watched the ink of her old name, her father's name, the name of Archer Beaumont, all of it, dissolve into gray, fragile ash. The wind from the chimney took them, and they were gone. Nez had a ledger. It was a thick, worn, cloth-bound book. He had used it for years to press dried plants, to make his charcoal maps of water, to keep an account of his traps. Since she had taught him, the back pages were now filled with his slow, strong, awkwardly formed letters. A, H, O, R, S, E, W, A, T, E, R. He had left it on the table. When she was done with the fire, she went to it. She opened it to a clean, fresh page. She took the charcoal pencil. Her hand was steady. She did not write Ellen Begay. That was a name of possession. That was the white man's way, a woman disappearing into a man. The very thing she had fled. She wrote her own truth. She wrote Ellen Ward Begay. And then, because the clarification was everything, she added 2 words, a small, legal, personal declaration. By choice. She was not his, she was with him. She had not been taken. She had associated. The name was not a brand, given to her by a father or a husband. It was a flag, planted by her own hand. The canyon, which had been a fortress, became a center. The world, which they had kept at bay, began to come to them, but it came in peace. Diego Salazar was the first. He rode in one afternoon, not with warnings, but with 3 small, shy dine children on his mules. They hid behind his legs, their black eyes wide with curiosity. Nez, Diego said, nodding. He turned to Ellen. Senora, I have a problem. These children, their mothers want them to learn the white man's paper, the talking leaves. I told them I knew a teacher, a very fine, very brave teacher. He grinned. And so, a school began. It was not a schoolhouse. It was a porch. Every 3rd day, Ellen would sit on the steps, under the home sign, and she would teach. She taught the letters. A, B, C, the canyon, which had only known the sound of wind and the rifle, now filled with the high, clear voices of children, laughing as they learned. Diego came. He taught them numbers. 1, 2, 3. He would count, and they would shout it back. He taught them in Spanish, in English, and he learned the words from them in Dine. Atsidi Yazi came. She did not come for the letters. She came with her own bag, filled with sinew and bright wool and deer hide. She sat on the porch, a small, silent, powerful presence. While Ellen taught the letters, Atsidi taught the hands. She showed the young girls how to sew, not the fine, useless stitches of a Philadelphia parlor, but the strong, deep, practical stitches of the people. She taught them how to mend a moccasin, how to weave a pattern, how to make a thing whole. And May Larkin came. She rode her mule out once a month, a perilous, cursing journey. She always brought a gift, a sack of white flour, a tin of peaches, a heavy iron pot. She would sit, drink a cup of coffee so strong it could float a horseshoe, and she would watch the new, strange, beautiful community. Well, she said one afternoon, her eyes on the children, I have seen a lot of things. I have seen men shot for less than $1. I have seen a town rise from dust and go back to it, but I never thought I would see this. She looked at Ellen. A school, a real one, run by the most dangerous woman in the territory. She smiled. It was a real smile, and it lit up her face. You have built a good thing here, child. A good, strong thing. The town of Ash Mesa had learned. News came, months later. A rumor on the telegraph, Judge Easton Beaumont had been censured in a federal hearing. His power in the territory was broken. His name was now associated with fraud and disgrace. The town, which had once been so ready to hunt Ellen down, barely registered the news. They were busy with their own lives. They had learned a new skill, a skill taught by May and Hollis and Atsidi. They had learned the high, holy art of silence, not the silence of fear, the silence of respect, the silence that lets a person be, the silence that lets a new, strange, beautiful thing grow in a canyon and protects it by looking the other way. One clear evening, Just as the sun was turning the rocks to fire, Nez began to walk. He did not take his rifle. He just walked, up the long slope, to the east. Ellen knew where he was going. She had a small bundle in her hand. She followed him, her steps quiet on the path. He did not look back, but he knew she was there. He was going to the place, the 2 gray, weathered stakes of wood that marked his brother's grave. Yiska. He stopped, a respectful distance away, and sat. He leaned his back against a juniper and closed his eyes. He entered his own private silence, a place of guilt and memory she could not follow. Ellen did not go to him. She did not touch him. She went to the grave. She had her bundle. In it were flat, smooth, red stones gathered from the new, living wash. One by one, she began to place them at the base of the 2 wooden markers. It was slow, careful work. She was not burying the old wood. She was not hiding it. She was supporting it. She was giving it a foundation. She was building a small, strong cairn around the old, sad memory, a wall of honor. She was preserving the trauma, but she was breaking its chains. When she was finished, the 2 markers stood proud, anchored by the new, red stone. She had brought one other thing. From her pocket, she took the first, tiny, purple flower from the lavender she had planted. It was the only one that had bloomed. She placed the single, small flower on the stones. She stepped back. She had done what she could. She had honored his past. She had made it part of their home. Nez watched her. He had carried this burden, this guilt, this memory, in absolute solitude for years. He had been the only mourner. Now, there were 2, the line of tension in his shoulders, a line that had been there since the day she met him, a line carved by grief, seemed to ease. That night, the cabin was warm. The yellow dog, who was now named Yazzie, was asleep by the door, his belly full, his ear no longer torn. The rain had come, a soft, gentle, spring rain that tapped on the roof like a comforting hand. The fire was low, a bed of red coals. They were not on the cot. They were lying on a soft, clean blanket on the stone floor, side by side, his head near hers, a comfortable, respectful distance between them. "The stone," he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble, the first to speak, "was a good thing." "He is your brother," she said, her voice just as quiet. "He is part of the home now." A long silence. The rain tapped. The fire popped. He moved. He rolled onto his side, to face her. He reached out his hand, his large, scarred warrior's hand. He laid it in the space between them, palm up. It was not a demand. It was not a plea. It was not a gesture of ownership. It was an offer. It was a choice. Ellen looked at his hand. She saw the man who had stood in the alley, the man who had braided her hair, the man who had taught her to shoot, the man who had let her walk free. She moved her own hand. She placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers. It was not a grip. It was not a chain. It was a linking. It was a warm, firm, dry connection. A promise made without a single fence. They lay there, head to head, hands linked, listening to the rain. They had found the truth. Home was not a map. It was not a deed or a warrant or a name in a ledger. Home was a person, and freedom was the choice to select that person every single morning, all over again. Thank you for listening to the story. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from, so we can connect and share our reflections. Please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video, and give it a boost by hitting the hype button. It helps this story reach more listeners who love the West as much as we do.